Well, hello everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, From Click to Connection, How to Maximise Attendee Conversions. So my name is John Monk from ASP, and it's a great pleasure to today welcome fantastic guest Tim Groot, CEO and founder of Grip. For those who don't know me, I am Head of Performance here at ASP, and my focus is very much on helping organisers get the most they can out of their event websites, whether it's driving more organic traffic, improving the user journey, or boosting conversion rates. Basically trying to get as much value as you can out of your website, and probably the reason why you bought it in the first place. So an enormous part of this is very much the registration process. The point in which all marketing efforts can pretty much succeed or fail. So this is very much on what we're going to be focusing on today, and very much the focus on registration. That funnel from where people firstly come in, go through the website, and whether they register or not, and then eventually go to your event. And sometimes this pinch point can very much make or break return on investment, as I'm sure you probably very well know, when it comes to your website and people actually registering and turning up. So there's three kind of main challenges which we're going to be talking today about and discussing. You'll be pleased to hear it's not going to be death by PowerPoint today. It's very much going to be a chat between myself and Tim, and very much around these kind of primary topics. Firstly, about the domain, i.e. Where the registration sits, and that kind of user experience, going people from the website onto registration and then beyond. How we can go about making sure that this is all tracked properly, ensuring you know how many people have actually registered, possibly where they have come from, and conversion rates and getting key data back as a key part of this. And finally, and certainly last but no means least, is the whole form design. And I know Tim has done a lot on this, and I don't know if you follow him on LinkedIn, but has recently been doing some further research and work into greatly improving this form design. But I'll certainly let him discuss it in a lot more detail. Very briefly, and this is where Tim comes in, founded Grip back in 2015. To connect people, ideas and opportunities through events. Since then, Grip has grown into one of the world's leading AI-powered event platforms, and now supports, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, over 500 events every year, with innovations in matchmaking and registration, and have won lots and lots of industry awards. To be honest, what's always really impressed me about Grip is its investment into research and development, and that reinvestment into itself and its product. And also how Tim personally spends time exploring emerging technologies, which really helps to keep Grip at the cutting edge of event tech. But that's enough from me. So Tim, maybe if you wouldn't mind just sort of introducing yourself and perhaps share a little bit about Grip's journey and kind of, maybe a couple of things on which you're focusing on right at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for the intro. So yeah, I'm Tim, founder and CEO of Grip. And I started the company about 10 years ago. The first, I'd say 5, I only focused on networking and meetings and matchmaking and everything that we can do there. And we're kind of reaping the rewards of that. Partially my work, but many of the team mainly on the work around hosted by Maximise, like kind of scheduling algorithms and recommendation algorithms, where our engaged product is very strong. And so for the last 18 months, I've spent, I'd say, a solid kind of 70–80% of my time on Grip Manage, which is our registration offering, understanding everything from all the different types of sprinters you can have, and how you can attach different lanyards to a badge, to the very mundane stuff, but also still very important to online registration forms, and how can you make them beautiful, how can you make them work well, the level of intricacies around that. There's so much you can do once you start thinking about a form, and the possibilities are endless, and also the ways that it can be used are endless. So yeah, that's been a super interesting journey that we're still very much in the middle of. We're far from perfect, but we're making good progress on what we can do in this space and what I'm excited about.
That's amazing. Fantastic. Thank you. Certainly when I started, because I have a background in many other industries, I started specializing in events about 4 years ago. And it certainly struck me when I came to events, the number of organisers that were coming to me with real pain points around the registration form. Had a particular kind of set of experience in the past with financial services, which very much talks about online forms, etc. And they're fairly advanced, if I'm honest, when it comes to forms, because that user journey from the website through to the form. There's a very, very direct line in financial services between that journey working really, really well and the amount of money they make. I mean, it's very, very defined, that journey, and they track it very, very closely, especially if some of the sums of money can be huge. So it's obviously in their interest to make sure that works really, really well. And the first thing that kind of struck me when I started looking at events was the fact that you come onto the website, and then you're bounced off, and I think it's becoming slightly less so nowadays, but it certainly seems a lot of organisers, you come onto the site and then you bounce off to another website, basically another domain that sometimes looks quite different. The URL at the top could be completely different, and in probably the last year, there's been an additional problem to that, in that people go onto this third-party registration form, and then you have to click cookie consent. You have to click the yes again. So that journey struck me as really not great. What sort of things have you sort of seen as well, Tim, kind of around that? Because obviously it sounds like this is a relative sort of, you've been looking at this in quite a bit of detail.
Yeah, so I think that, so if we start with this first topic, right, domain and UX, in my opinion, there are really only two solutions to this. Solution one is hosting your registration forms on a subdomain. So let's say, your event is DCD London, Data Center Dynamics London, happening right now in the Business Design Center, or was there this morning, right? That's your top level domain, dcdlondon.com, let's say. And then you host your registration form on register.dcdlondon.com. Like, I think I like that approach, because you can give the full space to the registration app, basically, and that form, and you can do much more in terms of kind of responsiveness on mobile. You can potentially link to it directly if you wanted to. There is more flexibility, but you can still have it live within the realm of the cookie consent of your main website. And if and we'll come on to that later, your kind of Google Analytics is set up directly in your Google Tag Manager, it can all fall within the same kind of analytics in that. So it makes tracking relatively straightforward. If you have, so that's kind of, for me, option one, and in my opinion, the preferred option. However, if you have a powerful website that has that you want to embed the form into, that is also an option, right? So you could like embed the registration form inside of it. That can be a little bit more tricky, mainly from a responsiveness and just from a look and feel, making that work nicely point of view, especially when you start talking about paid tickets and you start talking about wanting to kind of have it more of an e-commerce feel, right? With like your basket on the right, and how you book flights, for example, or e-commerce products like a Shopify kind of experience. So that, I think, becomes really challenging when you're embedding a form. And then I guess like the third one is when you're using the native form capabilities of your website provider and then using an API to send it into your registration form, which honestly I would really only do if you have free registrations. Then I think that's a kind of a path worth going down. So that's kind of my view on domains at the moment. But like point one, hosting your original subdomain for me is the superior approach.
That's really interesting, because I know when we spoke before, you were saying about you having a solution where you can make multiple registrations. Is that right, sir?
Yeah, so like I think we we are right. We started off being very focused on paid registrations. And one of the things that is kind of core to our fundamental beliefs is multiple people buying multiple passes or registering multiple people. It doesn't necessarily have to be paid, like if you think about it, but more and more we're seeing people come in groups, right? Like you might say, oh, I'm coming with 3 people from my company, or I'm registering my CEO and my CTO, or like whatever kind of people you're registering at the same time. And we saw that although 40% of kind of people went through the multiple tickets flow, which we call our just me and other, or me and others, or others flow, which basically means I'm registering other people. Actually, 65% of all revenue and therefore all the total registrants came through those 2 flows. Yeah. So by optimizing for multi-person registrations and making that a much more integral part of the registration flow, we've been able to drive more revenue and more registrants to customers, compared to what you see in the kind of standard reg flow, which is very much focused on the first person, and then somewhere down the line on page 5, it's all of a sudden a little pop-up that says like add colleague, and then you're like, you're asked to kind of add a colleague into it, which honestly I just don't think follows as nicely. I would want to say, look, I'm going to register 5 people. Maybe some of them I don't know yet, but I want to buy 5 tickets, or these are the 5 people I'm registering, and make that a core part of the experience, and that could result in bigger basket sizes and more registrants.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because if you buy airline tickets, for example, it's possible to buy a number of them and then fill out the details afterwards. So it certainly is probably what people will be used to, won't it? And I presume this journey is, when you've done it, is for paid for tickets only, not free tickets.
Look, I had a discussion with an organizer about this the other day. Like, I think probably when you have free registration at your event, I definitely believe there's still value in allowing multiple registrations. So, for example, like saying, look, I want to register 5 people. I'm in 2 minds, and I don't have any data on this yet, on whether you want to enforce people to assign those free tickets at the moment of registration. I think that you could use it, as a moment, let's say I register 5 tickets, even though I've only assigned 1 of them, and I've basically got 3 unassigned free tickets. I mean, that doesn't seem like it means much, but I think actually you could leverage it to then explore more interesting strategies and how you engage with that individual, because they clearly had an intention to register multiple people. You can then kind of deploy specific strategies, and you could then probably kind of engage them more. I don't know if you had forced them to already assign them on initial registration, whether that would increase your drop-off rate. So I think in the end, all of these things are optimization problems, and they're A/B problems. And I feel that's still an area where there is so much room for improvement. We don't really have the data on a cross-event level or a cross-flow level to actually say this flow works better. And I think, John, when we spoke during our pre-call, you had some interesting points on like pages versus 1 page, which I thought was really interesting. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because like I think it's so much more data and insight could be coming into this that really helps us get to better results.
Absolutely. Maybe actually remind me if I forget, we can jump into that a little bit more in the form design sort of bit.
Yes.
Sure. Please don't let me forget. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, so in the past, as a website provider, we've obviously had a desire in many ways, I guess, to keep people onto the website. But the key thing really is because obviously we want to show value for that website. But certainly keeping it within the domain, so you have a subdomain, it certainly solves so many of the problems that there are of going off domain, like you say. I mean, especially when it comes to tracking. Which becomes so problematic when you go to a third party, especially with the likes of cookie consent, both on your website and on the third party domain, which you remove that layer of complexity when you're on the same domain. So that becomes a lot easier. But it was interesting hearing what you're saying there, because if reg becomes a little bit more complex than just a fairly basic form, then I can certainly see why you'd want to use kind of your own technology to make sure that it's therefore on a subdomain, and you're building quite a dynamic and interactive web page, aren't you? That potentially could be really quite clever, putting in AI and various other things, and trying to make that work in tandem with another website or another platform. I can see actually some of the technical complexities around that. So certainly, I could certainly see for your multi registrations, and certainly when you're making the form more intelligent, having it on a subdomain within your own technology, I can certainly see how that will be the solution, to be honest.
Yeah, and like a really mundane, but like I think powerful example of it, kind of falls maybe slightly into form design as well, but is every form will have a drop down for country, right? So it'll be like,
Yeah.
well, which country you're from. We actually introduced something where we, based on the IP address, we guess which country you're from, and that one we show already in the dropdown as selected.
Yeah.
And then what we also do is for the phone number, we already pre-populate that as the kind of extension for your mobile number.
Yeah.
And you can really start optimizing some of these really small parts, right? For example, if somebody has selected founder and CEO as their job title, when you then have a seniority level dropdown, you could order the dropdown based on that information, or you could like bring in stuff that makes that more intelligent. Or there are so many things you can do actually now with AI and in general just with more clever approaches to forms to really think about this on a completely new level. And I think you kind of want to have a level of kind of controlled environment for doing some of these tests. And that's I think where it becomes a bit more interesting.
It's interesting. I mean, that sounds fantastic. I mean, certainly from the financial services background, anything that you can do to take out any layer of work for someone when they're filling out a form genuinely had an improvement. I mean, one of the areas in which they were always focused on was just getting someone's email address. Because once and then start to then backfill data relating to that email address. So because what happened certainly in the financial in the kind of the loans world is that people would often make multiple loan applications, and unbeknown to them, and often they were with the same organization but on different websites. So when you put an email address in, that therefore enabled them to backfill a lot of that form. So then when someone came to that form, they'd be able to see much of it was already pre-populated and filled out, which obviously makes it much more likely that they're going to be able to then hit the submit button at the end. And I presume we could have a similar type of scenario with an event form, if it's built around whether it be, like you say, some pre-filled based on their IP, or if they previously registered with that company or with a suite of companies, that it's all pre-filled, and so therefore the resistance to them pressing submit then becomes a lot less.
So I agree with you. I think that there are some public data sets available where you can get some of that data, right? You push in an email address and it gives you back like information about that person, and you do it based on domain level, and then you get back like, I don't know, size of company and industry they're in and yada yada. So I think there are some things you can pre-populate. I think you want to be really careful on it, because if you get it wrong and you show the wrong information, there are some significant PII kind of consideration that could be quite problematic. So we've always, like from a matchmaking engine point of view, we actually do automatic enrichment on a domain name, but we never show it anywhere. So it actually only gets used for our kind of vector database clustering to recommend other people, which is a whole different kind of thing. But anyway, that's kind of like where we use it, but it's not shown to anyone, including the organizer. It sits in the database, it's there, it's used just because of those kind of PI kind of configurations. However, I was talking with a kind of TMO of a top 10 commercial organizer, like one of the big UK organizers, and they're a very technologically advanced company, and they tried one-click wrench, right? Like they worked for it for years, they got to it, they did one-click wrench. Registrations went up, great, way more pre-reg. But what happened on site is that actually their conversion from pre-reg to attendance dropped significantly.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so they actually ended up with people that they had assigned, because they're very clever. They assigned like a score of how likely somebody is to show up on site based on the propensity, based on the form basically, and based on what they filled out. And then they know, okay, this is what they filled out, so we know there's a likelihood that they sign up, and they put them into different email flows from that. And very clever approach. But they said, so they dropped the one-click reg again because it actually negatively impacted conversion rates of on-site attendance. And so why is that? Well, my hypothesis around it is that filling out a registration form is in many ways a form of investment. So by creating friction, because we're so used to our life becoming more frictionless, introducing a little bit of friction can actually increase commitment, right? Sometimes something being hard, like a cocktail bar that has a hidden door, right? Like you have in Soho here in London, or you've got like places that introduce friction to get to the experience become more desirable, and therefore more likely that people actually do them. So the counter argument can be to creating one-click reg is that it becomes too easy to register, and as a result, your conversion rate go down. So then you need to. There's this book called Hooked by Nir Eyal, and it talks a lot about how much investment somebody has to do and the variable reward that comes from that. So I think that if you're going to that approach to really simplify your registration form, you need to kind of think about how you can introduce new types of investments in ahead of the show that people get committed to that in some way, shape, or form. So something that we did with Invite was a food and drinks event organized by Reed. I don't know if they still do it actually, but what we actually investigated was whether people that favorited a session on Grip or requested a meeting or marked somebody as interested, basically took any like engagement related action, were more or less likely or equally likely to show up on site for the event. And there was a significant difference. So the conversion rate for people that kind of just pre-reg to on-site conversion was like 56% or something. And people that had actually taken some type of engagement action pre-show, it was like 84%. So it was substantially higher. Now, of course, that has a sort of self-selecting bias, right? Because the people that were actually taking those actions were probably already more likely to show up anyway. But I do think that there is something there. So if you're going down simplifying your reg form, you want to try and think about what else can you get people to commit to pre-show that will make sure that you increase that kind of conversion to on-site registration in a substantial way.
It's interesting you say that, because again, going back to the financial services analogy, and that it was very much a two-tier process, a bit like you described, where it was an initial form to in essence register interest, because in many ways you weren't making a actual loan application out of the first form. It was then you were then getting someone interested, and then had quite a bit of communication with them afterwards to then complete that process. So there certainly appears to be a parallel between that and someone attending an event. And like you say, if that post-reg is also a key part of improving conversion rate and getting people to turn up on site, and that's often the thing. I mean, it's certainly so post-reg, is that something that you would engage with people at all, or is that something that purely the organizer then needs to do in their kind of social media activity or anything else?
I think that there's so much more. Like if I look at the areas where I'm super excited about with Manage, with Grip Manage and kind of our registration product, it is really in that post-reg phase, right? Like everything from dedicated email flows to personalized outreach to grouping people in different tiers, right? Like high likelihood of conversion to attendance to low to anything you can do to kind of create that level of sophistication and commitment. I think it's going to depend on the show, and you could probably create a couple of archetypes of like what actually indicates whether people will show up or not. I think that also with AI, there's so much that organizers can do. Like, for example, if I was an organizer, I would right now be buying like a Copilot, Claude, or ChatGPT kind of Pro so that your data is protected. And then I would take all my my pre-reg and my on-site attendance and probably the data that I have in some kind of engagement tool like Grip. And I would take all of that, I would pump that into one of these systems from the last couple of years or a couple of shows you have. And then I would say, figure out what are the main factors that impact conversion rate from pre to on-site attendance based on all the data that I've given you. And then, a computer goes brr and it will kind of spit out some thoughts. What I would then do is I would then take your current pre-reg for your upcoming event. I would take that and then put that in and ask, like, what is the likelihood per person of this person showing up on site based on historic data and based on what you're seeing on their profile right now, and give me a recommendation for each person on how I should engage with them in order to have them show up on site. And I think I'd be really curious to see what comes out of that analysis, but I'm sure you would come up with some interesting ideas that are very tailored to your business case that you could then put into your marketing automation system and see what it ends up.
I think that's something that's be fascinating to try and work with an organizer on, actually, because I'm sure there'll be some amazing insights, actually. I mean, looking at history is often the best way to predict the future, isn't it? So I think there's some there could be some fantastic stuff in there.
Yeah.
Just going back a step, I guess, to some of the granular detail on.
Oh, is it?
To look at their website, and one of the key things that came to light, it wasn't the website that was a problem at all. It was the whole registration process, which was on a third-party platform, and there were so many basic things that were wrong. So many very, very basic things that were wrong, from 101 distractions, because the user journey to that form was completely fragmented. So it was one form taking people either from pay-per-click directly to that form. So therefore it had to do some selling, and it had video on there. It had, why attend this event, this, that, and the other. But also it took people from the website that had already done the selling. So why do you need to say all that again? And the mobile experience was poor. It was confusing. So there was an awful lot of best practice in terms of that form that needed to be fixed, and then build into the fact that this form is, the reg company was huge, and then it had a huge lead time of about 2 months to get anything changed on it. It became a major problem for that organizer to basically just do what was a bit of best practice, quite frankly. So certainly what some of the things that I've learned when looking at a lot of forms is step one, just firstly making sure it looks like it comes from the website. So it's similar colors, similar logo. It feels like a seamless journey. So that would apply to the subdomain as well. So I presume when you set up the subdomain with Grip, that you make sure that looks all nice, and looks just like the website.
So I think there's a couple of points on this, right? So first of all, when you're looking at a registration form, it's like a microcosm of, the priorities of an organization, right? Because sales will come in that says our biggest exhibitor requires that we ask this registration question, and they want this information, otherwise they won't come and exhibit. So the show director goes, yes, we need to do this, and pushes that down to the people responsible for the form. And that immediately brings us on to the second question: who is responsible for the form? I think that if you look at probably over the last 30 years, who is responsible for registration, it's changed pretty significantly, because historically, registration is owned by operations, because on-site registration is really the bulk of the work. And so also the companies that really play in that space have a strong on-site focus. And I've just written a whole guide on on-site badge printing, and that is extremely important to get right. But I think you have to decouple the concepts of on-site registration and the hardware and the logistical elements of that from the online registration, which in my opinion does 100% needs to be owned by a tech-savvy marketer. And I'm saying that as there are different types of marketing. Marketing is such a broad spectrum of things nowadays. You got like your paid marketing, you got like your social media marketing, your brand marketing. There's so many types of marketing, but I think that the best results of where I think registration is heading is that you want to have a diverse skill set of people that can kind of own this within a marketing department. Not necessarily it doesn't even have to be full time, right? Like it could be like different skill sets that you bring in, and some great freelancers that can also help you with this. But I do think fundamentally you want to make sure that you can control the registration form yourself, meaning you can make changes to it, you can change the layout, the design, the look and feel. But also that, of course, comes with its own challenges, right? Like I've got an event next week that halfway through the registration form, the organizer decided to change one of the main registration questions from a multiple choice to a free form. Oh my God, that results in all sorts of challenges, right? So I think it's about finding that balance of flexibility and ownership that should sit with a marketing team for the online registration to make sure that it works well with the website, that it works well with your email campaigns, and that there is a clear responsibility for what the primary goal of what registration is, right? I think that you very often see that there are so many contradicting objectives with registration, right? Satisfying exhibitors, satisfying these people, whereas I think it needs to be extremely clear what the North Star KPI is, and it can only be one, and then what the supporting KPIs are that feed into that. Because I think once you start kind of contradicting and conflicting that, it's super hard for marketers to actually take responsibility for it and to do a great job in terms of creating high conversion forms.
Absolutely. And therefore having far too many questions on there. I mean, I've certainly found through referring back again to financial services that the more fields there are, whilst obviously taking into, I think it's very interesting what you were saying earlier about having some buy-in. But on the other hand, you don't have it going too far the other way, asking lots of questions, like you say, from other stakeholders, which aren't necessarily enhancing that registration experience, and just having there what's kind of necessary. Certainly having too many fields. It's well known within marketing that if you have too many fields, you will increase the amount of drop off and reduce conversion rates.
We've got a customer that just got acquired by a large UK organizer, and they're growing 3x like year on year. They grew, and like the growth is just tremendous of that event. And they've done an incredible job on like their whole kind of setup. And the number of I think the show is maybe like 6,000-7,000 people by now. They've got 2 demographical questions. That's all it is, 2 demographical questions. And I sometimes genuinely, I can see it in the data now, right? Like previously I was at a hunch of it, but I don't see any correlation between the growth or networking impact in that sense on platform compared to the number of questions being asked. It's about the quality of the questions and the sophistication of those individual questions being asked. And if those are good, you, with very few questions, should have enough to work with. And then, of course, on the engage side, I think fundamentally, I think that there are different types of questions. One is about kind of profiling questions, like seniority level, kind of like what size of company, like those kind of things are kind of profiling questions. And then there are intent questions. Intent questions could be, for example, what product categories are you interested in? Or like, what is your state in the buying cycle? Or like those kind of like intent-based questions. I would never ask those in a registration form because intent changes. It's that simple. Like, I think that once I see that those start being asked in registration forms, very often people disengage, right? They're like, well, I don't know yet. The event is in X number of months or weeks. Like, I don't yet know that. And so I think those should always come at the moment people enter the kind of matchmaking or engagement platform, because that's where those questions can be asked very effectively. And it's where people are in a mindset of answering them because it gives them an intent for their networking as well.
I mean, in many ways, it's classic, I mean, sort of conversion rate optimization in many ways. You know, the quality of the question that's being asked is, yeah, I mean, it's when people feel that they're just being asked, that people are just trying to scrape data from them, that then people lose interest. And so in terms of testing forms, you know, I know you're doing quite a bit of work at the moment in terms of looking at best practice for what does make a what does make a good form. What kind of stuff have you done in terms of kind of testing forms, or have you seen clients doing as to, you know, maybe is it, you know, A/B testing, you know, through the registration process so they can got a high volume of traffic and see what works better than other, or are they testing one event versus another event and running them in parallel? What sort of ways have you seen kind of testing like that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we've been playing with. So first of all, it's been super focused on you know, how deep can we integrate with GA4 and how can we do that in the best possible way. And there are so many different ways that's getting done by different customers at the moment. So that's been a core area of focus. How can we make our integration with Google Analytics like really top notch? And we're still learning a lot about that and how we can refine it better and look at more detail on it. The next step for me, which is actually an area that I did a lot with in the beginning days of Grip, which was tools like Hotjar, like heat mapping and how people are interacting with forms. So I've really enjoyed starting to look at some of those tools again, and we'll be kind of implementing some ourselves in kind of collaboration with organizers to see how people are actually clicking through and dropping off on those forms. That's a really interesting kind of way of I think approaching that form optimization process. Then I think we will look at some. I'm unsure yet whether with A/B testing, whether I will look at some kind of third-party tools like Optimizely or others. Or whether we will look at building some of that ourselves. But those are definitely considerations. I think that you want to, I'm not sure if if A/B testing is necessarily the thing that is going to make the difference, because you want the data quality to be the same. So you can really, on the margins, make changes, but I think at scale, you can probably achieve the same result by testing on an event level. And so creating more benchmarks. And I love benchmarks. We do a lot of that on Engage. Like, okay, the 10 registration forms that had more than 5 questions had a 30% conversion rate versus the registration forms that had less than 5 questions had a 40% conversion rate, something like that. I think that if we look more at the aggregate level, we can probably give similar insights in a much cleverer way to organizers without having to set up A/B tests, because the thing is, those take a lot of time, right? Like, and I see many organizers, they create their registration form once, and that's it. And then, they're done. Having to go in there, manage your A/B test, that's a full-time role. That's like a marketing optimization person. It's a full-time gig. And I don't know if many organizers have the appetite for
that. I think that's some very interesting points in about A/B testing and testing forms, and I've certainly found that kind of the granular detail in making the form easy to use is worth the effort. But like you say, I mean, it becomes a challenge for an organizer when they only have an event once a year. And what interested me about when we chatted, had the prep call, was saying how you're starting to do benchmarking work in relation to forms. What kind of stuff are you doing there?
Yeah, so I think like what I mentioned in the beginning, right? The just me and others flow. I think like how do you compare as an organizer in terms of multi-ticket purchases? What is the average basket size in terms of both number of tickets, but also price comparisons, right? Like, there's of course a very big difference between a free registration and a £50 ticket, but is the drop-off rate of a £50 ticket to a £500 ticket, how significant is that? So, because I think actually the price elasticity of a lot of events is probably much higher than what they probably know. So, for example, increasing your prices with 20%, maybe it actually won't increase churn that much, or like a drop-off rate that much actually. So, I think that there is more data that we could get into that. to help organizers optimize for their prices, as well as, of course, the flow as a whole, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
if you add this question, this will increase your conversion rate by 1%, right? I would love to be able to showcase that and say, adding this question will result in a drop-off, or it won't. I don't know. Like, I'm still figuring out the answers on that. But yeah, I think that's really interesting in terms of the form design and the amount of information that is being requested to get to a sign up.
Yeah. Yeah. First, I've just realised my camera's stopped working, so apologies everyone for that. Or it may be a bonus. I mean, just some best practices. Certainly, if people want some kind of quick takeaways on the form, is that I'd suggest it's minimal distraction, independent on where they've come from. So remember, if people have come from the website, they've come to that form from the selling has already been done, so you don't necessarily need to do it again. If, for example, you want to send people to there from a third-party campaign, PPC or social media, maybe the selling has to be done, at the point of the form and some marketing there. So therefore, you need a separate form. You can't necessarily have one form that does both things, because it will be overload for those who are coming from certainly from the website. And there's always that kind of, giving it to a friend or family member, and see how they look at it. Do they feel it's got too many? Would they fill it out? Does it look good on mobile? Does it look good on desktop? I often find when you're working in a business yourself and you get engrossed in the kind of the details, just hand it over to that other person, have them look at it and see if they've got any particular comments. And obviously this doesn't apply to Grip, but in many other third-party form providers, also the experience I've had is leave plenty of time before the event to get the form sorted, because if there's something you don't like about it, certainly the feedback I've had is that with many companies it can take an age to get some of those changes made, which could directly impact registrations, etc. So just certainly some of the things that I've found just when talking with organisers. I just thought I'd say something. We haven't really chatted about data at all, Tim. So I think you've mentioned Google Analytics, and that's certainly how that can work a lot better if it's on the subdomain and you don't have that broken by going off to a third-party form. Do many of your clients use Google Analytics?
Yeah, I think everybody uses it. So yeah, no, definitely.
I know you were saying you were Grip are working on some of your own insights.
Yeah, so we on the Engage side, we have our own kind of customer data platform for kind of views and clicks and so forth. So we're working on bringing that into the registration experience as well, so we can help organizers with kind of first-party tracking on views and clicks. And like honestly, I think I would require any technology provider for event tech that has a participant-facing view. So whether it's your website or your registration or your app or so forth, to have their own tracking capability. And although you might say, well, I just want to plug everything into GA4 and then I have everything there. Yes, that's great. But like in addition to that, you can benefit a lot from the layer of insight that they'll be able to provide you, or we will be able to provide you by having our own tracking, because we can be much more helpful and supportive in whatever your kind of goals are. So I think, yeah, we've been quite focused on that kind of data and tracking side of things, and how we can then display that back to the organizer. We just launched our first kind of insights dashboard, where we actually showcase a 4-week forecast. Like we use some AI to forecast how many registrants we expect to come in. It's still very early days, so it's not super intelligent yet. I want to make it a lot better, but I think it shows the intent of where we want to go in that space. So yeah, and I think GA4, like there's still so much to explore within there as well, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly what I find, and we help quite a few customers with this, in that the tracking is broken if you're going often to third party. So I'd suggest to a lot of people here listening to this is kind of investigate going onto a subdomain first, so you can actually start to get some data back from back into GA4, because GA4 is so powerful. Much of what you need is kind of already in there. But some simple things that people can start is, for example, setting up tracking of a register now button. And then from that, you can then start to see the drop-off rate between those who actually then do register. So obviously people click the button, not everyone actually then fills out the form. So, but I'd suggest the very, very first thing is to try and get the form onto a subdomain, so you massively reduce the complexities of tracking within GA4, and you actually start getting some data back. So many organisers I speak to just do not have complete data, so they really are flying blind and missing so many opportunities, or missing opportunities, and also not even knowing what's broken. And I know when I have really sort of delved deep into analytics of forms, sometimes as they go through different steps, and the analytics are absolutely invaluable. You can see at one particular point, maybe there's a 30% drop-off rate, and immediately that tells you the story. Whether it's that one question or whether it's that one design element that needs to be fixed. And without those analytics there, all the best practice kind of goes out the window, because you really don't know with your own form what's working and what isn't. So I'd certainly encourage people is that the data is absolutely crucial, because it really tells you what's working and what isn't. I mean, as I have spent time doing conversion rate optimization, whilst best practice is always the place to start and you can model other people, it's not really. And I mean, Tim's spoken about this plenty about different verticals and different types of events, is that so often best practice can be proved wrong, whether it's a typeface, a color, a number of questions. So like you said, like there may be some events where lots of questions actually, and the right questions are the answer, whereas there may be other events in which very few questions are the answer, and the data is really the key to highlighting that. So we've had a question that's come in. It says, are there any specific examples of UX changes that dramatically improve registration conversion rates?
I had a really kind of like, it's not purely a registration form, it's actually our own demo form. And so on this demo form, I just put the link in the chat, and this is not an old kind of, I just wanted to kind of showcase here on this, like there's like a quote that you see from somebody on the left of like, that uses Grip. There's like a customer of us, and then there's some awards like kind of below that. The value prop that we show there, and what we show, the awards, like all of these things, we've been through like 20 different iterations of that. Like, do we show customer logos versus awards? Which kind of like, which quote do we show? Like, how do we show it? So like, do we not show anything? Like, John, to your point, right? Like we thought like, okay, well, we don't need to show any of that, right? So let's just only show the form. But actually, there's been significant uplift by showing a quote, and then showing the kind of different logos actually also had a bit of an uplift. So there's these really kind of clever things you can do. There's also like, you have kind of like here, request a demo, and then below that you can ask for a personalized like a group demo and stuff. And so there's some interesting things that we played around with. The other thing that we started doing, like we didn't have this, what would you like to do with Grip? But by asking people what they want to do with Grip, we've seen an increase in the like attendance of our demos when people actually request a demo. So I think that comes back to my earlier point. Like I think, and I could have pulled up an example of a registration form as well, to be completely honest. But like, I think, for example, what I really like is, just want to show you one. So they actually don't. Trying to see. The event just finished. So I really like registration forms. I see a lot of power in these types of pages. So Manifest is a big logistics event, and there's actually a couple of things that are like maybe not completely working well with this when you actually go to the form itself. But when you actually land on this Manifest like / register, they showcase their main attendee pass, and then below that they show their kind of supporting pass types. For the people that do paid events, I think this is a really nice layout because we've seen that being able to have this intermediate step, which is like homepage and then an on-site page where you show your different websites and then going to the registration form can really help with outlining that value prop that John was actually talking about. So being able to communicate that value prop and saying, oh, this is why you should be buying this pass on this kind of pre-page basically really helps because then I think it increases the conversion rate once people actually get to that form. So yeah, there's some interesting things that you can do on this kind of like intermediate pages, in my opinion.
I mean, certainly about the yeah, setting people up to actually wanting to complete the form. I know one particular client, the form wasn't working at all. People weren't filling out the form simply, and it was actually at similar prices to these, simply because that value proposition hadn't been set up before. So whilst that obviously goes into more of a a marketing story element, you've certainly raised a very good point there.
Yeah.
I'd just quickly like to raise, in regards to UX, and the question there is also the concept of mobile. And the different devices. We have certainly seen, looking at Google Analytics, how a form can work really well on one device and not necessarily on another. Also, how many organisers aren't necessarily aware of how many people are using one device versus another. So we had a particular client who specialised in logistics, and they didn't actually realise that a lot of the guys that came to the event, worked within lorries and that type of thing, so therefore they were on mobile devices, and they never knew that when in terms of their website and how it was used, and therefore registration and conversion rates was actually quite low because the form had been designed to work well on desktop and not particularly brilliantly on mobile. So knowing how people are engaging with it is incredibly important, and especially if you have a high mobile usage, almost need to look at the design of that first and try it yourself. Try filling the form out and actually on your mobile rather than rather than on your PC. How does it feel to you and how does it work? And often that kind of stripping it back to how you use it and how you feel about it can often answer many of the questions as how you can improve UX and conversion rates.
John, I'm curious, you just said something like, the difference between different mobile devices and how the reg form looked at those different mobile devices. Like, any kind of practical tips on, what are kind of practical best practices, I guess, on how your form looks great on different mobile devices? I'm curious.
Well, firstly, we typically find that tablet use is pretty low. So we're pretty much looking at a desktop device, a laptop, or latest iPhone. So those are kind of, and within Google Analytics, you can very much also then drill down into precisely what device that people are using. So I certainly would suggest that's where Google Analytics does come into its own. So you can really see, what devices are people really looking at your website on, and then in terms of best practice when then people are on that device, it's just making sure that it displays well. You can easily interact with all of the different elements. So if you need to add, it's not too small. It's nice and easy to read. I know when Tim and I were chatting before, and we had a small conversation about tabbed forms versus kind of long forms. And if a form is laid out nicely and the text is large and it's easy to add elements within all of the different fields, a long form in many cases was found to actually encourage improved conversions, because especially when it's on a mobile device, in many ways it doesn't feel like a long form. It feels like a series of short forms as you scroll your way down. And I guess feeding in what Tim was saying earlier about also asking intelligent and good questions. Once you've filled out that first section, maybe you'll scroll down a bit further and then fill in a few more questions, and then you'll scroll down further and fill in a few more. So I think also what I would encourage is what we see so many times also with the websites, is that there isn't that learning brought from last year. So if your event was a year ago, there's often that desire to start again with new graphics, new design, etc., etc., and that often then rolls itself over into the form. Try and learn from last year. What the look at the data. How were people converting? Were there things that could be improved? And try and build on that rather than starting from scratch, because especially if you have an annual event, in many ways you don't have too many opportunities to test and measure that form. So you certainly don't want to lose the learnings that you had last year. Try and keep that form. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think that are definitely, because the challenge with mobile, and like I design our current product partially myself, so like I've been very involved in kind of the size of buttons in the registration form, for example, and the text that it says in the button. So I'm very particular about buttons having to explain what they say, rather than like next, for example. It's to show like skip attendee or like go to order summary, right? Rather than just like next step, basically. So like I'm very particular about the way that we approach that. But it does create questions when you go to mobile, because you can't shrink everything down to the right level. So you can't actually, fit it all onto a mobile screen. So we've been kind of, I think iterating is the nice word. Struggling with probably is like, how do you kind of fit it all in? And one direction I was thinking is to actually design two completely different apps, basically. So you can actually design two forms, one that is a mobile form, one is a web form, that is kind of completely different. Even down to the questions, like other questions you could drop on mobile compared to on desktop, because I think that it's kind of, everyone tests initially on desktop, right? Because you're designing the form on desktop. But there's probably something to be said for how you can actually switch that around and really optimize that mobile experience, because the percentage of mobile, reg is so high nowadays. It's a really kind of interesting area to focus on what can be done in that space and where that's heading. And it's only going to increase. I don't see any reason why mobile would go down. I only think it will increase.
Absolutely.
And I think the question becomes kind of like, how can you optimize that even further?
I mean, there are many organisers in which you would expect it to be 100% B2B, or 100% B2B, and expect all visitors to be on desktop. And it always surprises me the percentage of people who are on mobile, and it really shouldn't be ignored. Katie's just sent me a Teams message saying 2 minutes left. So we've run. I could speak to you for hours, Tim, to be honest. It's been so interesting. It really has. So much amazing information, and we've probably only scratched the surface of some of these things, but hopefully that's been useful for people. We've covered quite a few topics. Hopefully there are a few things there that people can take away from the data collection and making sure their analytics is working, etc., etc. But thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate your time. Grip, actually, if you're eager for more Grip, they have a webinar in a week's time, September the 28th. The right ingredients: how to craft your perfect participant experience with data-led measurement. So hopefully it's moving on a little bit from what we've discussed here. But thanks again, Tim. Really appreciate it. Stay tuned. There'll be more ASP webinars as well. Next date and subject to be announced, but we'll keep you informed. Okay, thanks again, Tim.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me, John. Really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Pleasure. See you. Bye-bye.